हेलो स्टूडेंट्स। आज हम पढ़ेंगे नेक्स्ट क्लासिफिकेशन ऑफ कोरिलेशन। एक क्लासिफिकेशन कल हमने पढ़ी है। इन दैट क्लासिफिकेशन वी स्टडी अबाउट पॉजिटिव एंड नेगेटिव कोरिलेशन। तो आज हम दूसरी क्लासिफिकेशन पढ़ेंगे। अकॉर्डिंग टू दिस क्लासिफिकेशन there are two types of correlation. There are two types of correlation. On the basis of this next classification, on the basis of linear and non-linear correlation. We have linear correlation and we have another is non-linear correlation. Non-linear correlation. One is linear correlation and another is non-linear correlation. Yesterday in the last lecture we study about negative and positive. Positive and negative, it was quite simple. Positive correlation means when one variable increases, another also increase. That means when two variables change in the same direction, move in the same direction. Next was negative correlation, when two variables change or move in the opposite direction to each other. One increases, another decreases. One decreases, another increases. आज जो classification हम पढ़ेंगे that is linear and non-linear. What is linear correlation? First we will take what is linear correlation. It is also very simple. When two variables change in a constant proportion, in a constant proportion, it is called linear correlation. यहाँ यह नहीं देखना है कि डायरेक्शन क्या है, पॉजिटिव डायरेक्शन है या नेगेटिव डायरेक्शन है, अपोजिट है या नॉन अपोजिट है, वो चीज यहाँ नहीं देखी जाती. They change whether they increase or they decrease, but in the constant proportion. But in the constant. In other words, we can say if two variables, or two set of data change in fixed proportion, change in constant or fixed proportion, bear the fixed proportion to each other, to each other, it is non-linear. It is linear. It is linear. Also, in the linear correlation, that means when two variables change in the constant proportion or in the fixed proportion, when this linear proportion is shown on a graph paper. In linear correlation, when data of two variables are shown on a graph and we get a straight line. We get a straight line. Or we can say in other words, when a linear correlation is shown on a graph paper, when it is plotted on a graph paper, it shows a straight line. It shows a straight line. Thus, we can say linear correlation implies a straight line relationship. Thus, a linear correlation shows a straight line. Shows a straight line relation. So it is clear now from these pointers that when two variables change, move in a constant proportion, in the same proportion, in the fixed proportion, that means when one changes by some percentage, another changes by the same percentage. If one changes by 10%, for example, increases by 10%, another also increase by same 10% or decrease by same 10%. Here we do not take the positive or negative correlation. We take the word change, both changes, whether oppositely or non-oppositely, whether positively or non-positively or negatively. That is, we can say, for example, if one variable changes by 10%, for example, another variable also changes by same 10%. Another variable also changes by same 10%. This is fixed proportion or constant proportion. अगर एक वेरिएबल चेंज होता है 10% तो दूसरा भी चेंज होता है 10%. अगर एक चेंज होता है 20% तो दूसरा भी चेंज होता है 20%. अगर एक चेंज होता है 50% दूसरा भी चेंज होता है 50%. तो the change is fixed. In terms of percentage, it is fixed. If one changes by some percentage, another changes by the same percentage. When such a relation is plotted on a graph paper, we get a straight line. We get a straight line. We get a straight line. We can make an example of this through tabulation, through tabular form. For example, this is the example of linear correlation. For example, we have variable x and we have variable y. If value of variable x is 2 and variable y is 4, for example, if one changes, for example, this increases from 2 to 4, that means here we have 100% increase. It is 100% increase. Let us take this 5. Sorry, take this 5. This is 5. This changes by 100%, a double change. This also changes by the same 100%. X doubles, Y also doubles. We do not see whether Y increased or decreased, but Y changed due to change in X. X increased, Y also increased. Y can decrease also, but by the same proportion. If this is 6, there is 50% change. From 4 to 6, it is 50% change. Here, this also changes by 50%. This is 50. If this changes from 6 to 8, it is, for example, 33%, and this is 20, it is 33%. So, the amount X changes, the Y changes by the same amount, by the same percentage. 8, this is, for example, 10, this is 25, this is 12, and this is 30, this is 14, and this is 35. So this is the example of linear correlation. Here we increased X and we increased Y. Here this relation can be in such a way that this, if this decreases, this can increase. Sometimes this can increase, and the graph paper can be like this, straight line. If this is X and this is Y, X is shown on this X-axis, Y is shown on Y-axis, values of Y, and these are values of X. This is a straight line. Or it can be like this, but a straight line. It can be negative or positive, but in the form of a straight line. This is linear correlation. Now you take the non-linear correlation. In linear correlation, the change is in the fixed proportion. But in the non-linear correlation, the change is not in the fixed proportion, but in the variable proportion. Or we can say it is in different proportion. Changes in different proportion. That is when we can explain nonlinear correlation. That is when two variables change or do not change in constant proportion. Do not change in constant proportion or do not change in fixed proportion. It is called the relation is said to be non-linear. When two variables change in different proportion or two variables do not change in the constant proportion or fixed proportion, such a relationship is called non-linear relationship. Such a relationship do not form a straight line. Also, the non-linear relationship do not form straight line on a graph paper. So when non-linear relation is plotted on a graph paper, we do not get a straight line, but we get a curve. Or we can say when two variables change in different proportions. It is called a non-linear correlation or non-linear relation. We can have an example for it also. If we have values of x and values of y. For example, value of x is 2, value of y is 4. If it changes from 2 to 4, there is 50% increase, 50% change. So here, this y do not change by equal for 50%. It changes by less than 50% or more than 50%. Less than 50% or, for example, it goes to 7. That means there is 75% change in y. There is 75% change in y. It is 6, it is 12. It is 8, it is 18. So it is 10, it is 25. It is 12, it is 35. It is 14, it is 45. So here x and y changes in different proportions, do not change in the same proportion. We can write down it. If one variable changes by 10%, another changes by less than or more than 10%. Another variable changes by less than or more than 10%. It is non-linear correlation. Such a relation is non-linear correlation, and we also clarified that here we do not form a straight line. We do not form a straight line graph. For example, I can give you the example what type of graph. तो थोड़ा रफ आइडिया हमारे पास है तो कैसा होगा ये अगर नॉन लीनियर इक्वेशन है नॉन लीनियर रिलेशन है तो ये ऐसे भी हो सकती है ये ऐसे भी हो सकती है दिस इज नॉन लीनियर ये फॉर एग्जांपल ये ऐसे भी हो सकती है ये ऐसे भी हो सकती है so if this is x and this is y x and y here we measure x and here we measure y here we measure x here we measure y so such a relation is called a non-linear when two variables change in variable proportion or different proportions. One changes by some percentage, another changes by different percentage, not that percentage. अगर x change हो गया 10%, y change होगा by more than 10% or less than 10%. So here the relation is non-linear. Relation is non-linear. So this is the next classification of correlation. On the basis of this classification, linear and non-linear, we have two types, linear correlation and non-linear correlation. Then we have the next classification, multiple correlation and sample correlation. Sample correlation and multiple correlation that we will discuss in the next topic, next lecture.